So folks, we've done the assembly. Everything went quite well. I had no surprises. I got all the parts, nothing missing, nothing damaged, so that's good. So now we can start looking at all the different controls and things you can change on this saw, and then we start after that testing it, and then we start looking at some maintenance aspects of the saw, what you can adjust and what you cannot adjust. So let's start with exploring the saw. So in the front of the saw we have this great handle that you can put in, but you can also pull it out. And because the whole stand is on a wheel, you can move it around. It has in the back rubber wheels on bearings. Locking a working piece in place seems to be reasonably well built and solid. And I like this method. You can slide it backward, and then you need to turn the wheel. And let's see how good it grips. So now it's in place. Yeah. And that grips pretty well. And actually the wheel to turn feels quite good. So I need to push it a bit more. There we go. So that's good. So if I unlock it, look at that. I can just slide it back. Isn't that nice? And then I can take the piece out. So that's pretty good. It has an adjustment for cutting the pieces always to the right length. This is a metal bar that you actually can pull out, and in fact you could even put a longer one in if you wanted to. And it comes with all the keys, so that looks all right. So if we lock it down, then we will be able to cut it always to the right length if we wanted to have always the same. The saw can cut in different angles between 0 and 60 degrees. You unlock the unit, then you turn it until you have the right amount of degrees you want to have, and the pointer is right here, and then just lock it into place. But you can see that you can turn it in all kind of directions. In this direction it's kind of limited to 45 degrees. In the other direction it can go up to 60 degrees. We've got the power on and off switches, but we have an automatic power off, and this is something you can adjust. So whenever you're cutting and the saw is coming down, once it has reached its end, it will actually push this button down and turn it off. Right now it's disengaged because I lifted it up because I don't need that, but this is something you can do and adjust. So if you want to turn it off automatically at a certain depth of the saw, then you can, but then you need to adjust this screw here. Metal. If you're going to cut pieces of metal, then they will have different thicknesses, and it's important that these parts here are as close as possible to the piece itself, because these elements here have support rollers for the blade. So 2 on the side and 1 on the top, and you can adjust the distance to the piece by sliding this up or down. So and these are the rollers. You have 2 rollers on the side to keep the blade in place, and there's 1 roller on the top against the blade so that it doesn't go up when you're pushing down the saw, to make sure you get a straight cut. And the bolt on the top is the bolt that you need to use to adjust the position of the blade so you get a straight 90-degree cut towards the surface where your piece is resting on. But over here you have this big knob, and if you turn it counterclockwise, then you will loosen up the blade, and if you turn it clockwise you will tighten up the blade. So this is really something you should do. If you don't use a saw for a long time, I recommend that you loosen up the blade a bit so it doesn't sit under a high stress all the time. If you start using it, then I would recommend that you tighten up this nut or tighten up the blade, because you should be working with a loose blade. Near to the cutting handle you will find also these bolts here, and these bolts are used to adjust the tracking of the blade onto the wheel which is inside, and we'll look at that more in detail when we talk about the maintenance and adjustment of the saw. The motor itself is a 550 watts motor running at monophase at 220 volts, and it makes about 1440 rotations per minute. It's made out of an aluminum casing, so that looks quite good. I have not seen anything wrong with this. It seems to have 2 condensators on it to start it all up. This is the gearbox, and this saw has 3 speeds. You can undo this little Phillips screw on the top, and then you can fold open the gearbox. The gearbox allows you to change the belt to 3 positions. The bottom position, all the way in the bottom, is the 100 feet per minute speed for the bandsaw itself. That's used for very hard materials like inox and hard steel. The middle position gives you about 150 feet per minute, and that is good for mild steel and your average metal that you would be cutting. And then the top position, if you move the belt to the top, that is the position to be used for soft materials like copper and aluminum. So that's what you can do. You can adjust it. I have it right now set, and I think it comes like this from the factory for your average steel that you want to cut. Removing the belt and taking it into another position, we look at that, at all the adjustments in another video, because that would take us too long right here. There is one last part we need to look at, and it's this part right here. This is kind of a locking capability. You can lock this in place, so now you cannot move the whole saw down. You need to pull it out to do that. And over here we have the spring, which you can adjust. And that's the spring that's going to hold back a bit your down pressure while you're cutting. Let's turn on the saw and see what happens. Down the saw, and you see how it cuts out? It's cutting out pretty early, as you can see, but that's because that's the way this screw is adjusted. But we look at all that in the adjustments and the maintenance of this saw. Turning this valve clockwise closes it off, make it harder for the saw to come down. Turning it anti-clockwise, the saw will go down faster. So that is how this little ventil is working here. Saw blades, they come in all kind of types and all kind of tooth forms. What we have on this one de facto is what I think it's a precision blade, that's what we call it. And it's important to know that whatever you cut, the piece you're cutting, you should have at least 3 teeth touching the surface. If you do not, then you need to put another blade on. This saw, like any other saw, has some limitations in the sizes of pieces it can cut. At a 90-degree angle, where we have it right now, the piece can be 100 mil by 150 mil, so 10 by 15 centimeters. If you're going to cut at an angle of 45 degrees, then the piece has to be reduced. It's 95 mil by 75 mil. And then if you're going to cut at an angle of 60 degrees, then the maximum piece is about 50 by 56 millimeters. So these are the limitations, and now I think it's time to give it a real try in cutting a piece of metal. I'm going to cut a mild steel tube and see how good that goes. Let's try a 90-degree cut on a mild steel tube. So we need to lock it in place so it doesn't move. So let's turn on the saw and then see how good this works. The blade is still pretty sharp and it went reasonable smooth, and it's a pretty thick tube as well. I think the sides are about 3 mil, and that worked quite good. And it looks like it's pretty straight, so let's place it on this flat surface and see. Yeah, that's really nice and flat, so I'm quite happy with that. So it's cutting pretty straight, although I did not do any adjustments yet. So now let's try a 45-degree angle. Release it and then turn the pointer to about 45 degrees. There we go. That should be about it. I cannot cut with this piece here on this side at 45 degrees. I have to move it over to the other side. Now I could have turned, of course, the saw around and have done 45 degrees on the other side, that would have worked as well. Let me cut it like this first, and then afterwards we move the workpiece around to show you on how you need to cut at 60 degrees. So I'm going to cut this piece here. That's the piece we just cut. And let's see, and this fits quite nice, doesn't it? So that's really good. So that was an easy cut, and it worked just fine. Now, if you're gonna cut at 60 degrees, we can't go further this way, so we have to go this direction. Let me show you then what happens. But there is a solution for it. By the way, did you notice that I'm using the cop lights? These are great LED lights, by the way, to get some extra light. So I'm turning it all the way around to about maximum 60 degrees. All right, now that is a bit of an issue, because if I'm going to cut, I will cut right on my support here, and that's not going to work. So there's only one thing I can do, is now move the support to the other side, and you can do this with this saw. So for that, you need to undo this bolt and that bolt, and just move it over. There you go. You also see those little bushes, right? So you would have to put them in there. So that's one. And this one is a bit tight. But probably with a little bit of marking, I will get it out, and then we stick it there. The other one goes here. And then we can put the piece back. All right, like so. And now we will be able to cut. I think I'm going to leave it in this position. So now let's try a 60-degree cut on a smaller piece of metal. We know that the dimensions are a bit more restrictive on this angle, but this is a small piece. I don't have a bigger one, so let's try that out and see how that is gonna cut. So here's our 60-degree cut, and here's the piece we cut off. There you go. So I think overall this looks quite good, and it works really well. Cutting a piece of metal is easy. Position it in the clamp, tighten it up, make it tight enough so it doesn't move, and then you should be ready to go. First of all, close the valve by turning it completely clockwise, and you've seen the valve before. This is on this side. Turning this valve clockwise closes it off, make it harder for the saw to come down. Turning it anti-clockwise, the saw will go down faster. Now we can start up the saw. We'll unlock it and let it slowly come down. Once it's there, open up the valve by turning it counterclockwise, and the saw will slowly descend. Let it come down real slow. And now the saw can cut through the metal, and by its own weight it will cut through the tube. If it's going too fast, then you can adjust it by turning it clockwise. And then the saw stops automatically because I have adjusted the auto stop. So folks, we've come to the end of this video, and I think this hacksaw works pretty well. Of course, I don't know what the longevity of the blade will be. I haven't used it that long, but we'll see how long it lasts, and you can always get it replaced. because those are standard blades. And for the rest, I think this machine is quite alright. I have another video, if you're interested in it, to look at all the alignments and adjustments and the calibration for the actual blade, because that has to run straight. How you adjust it on the running wheels here to make sure it's a 90-degree angle, and of course that it tracks properly on the big wheel in the top. But that's in another video. So I hope you enjoyed it, and maybe I see you again in another video where I'm going to do another review of one of the ToolMania tools.